Populism can be very hard to define because it varies from national context to national context. The one thing that parties, movements, politicians who are described as populists tend to share is this insistence that traditional elites and institutions are ignoring the demands and the needs of the masses. So there's a very us versus them quality to populism. They're really a consequence of other parties and institutions' failures rather than the cause of them.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best.
In a lot of other countries, the enemy may be immigrants, people who look different than us, people who think different than us. The social and economic problems that Europe is currently grappling with started decades ago and have sort of gradually increased over time. So what we really had was this kind of conflation of economic and social problems that really, I think, pushed a lot of voters to embrace radical change. The upcoming French elections provide us with a great prism through which to understand the meaning and the rise of populism.
Mes chers compatriotes, vous m'avez porté au second tour de l'élection présidentielle.
Marine Le Pen, who represents the National Front, has turned herself into an incredibly powerful and I think interesting figure.
Il est temps de libérer le peuple français d'élites arrogantes qui veulent lui dicter sa conduite, car oui, je suis la candidate du peuple.
Should Macron win and not manage to convince voters afterwards that his program can actually solve their problems, we should expect her to come back in the next presidential election even stronger. Germany, along with France, remains the main player, the main powers in Europe. So what happens there really has a huge impact outside of the country's borders.
Wir wollen unsere Heimat behalten, unsere Identität behalten und wir sind stolz darauf, Deutsche zu sein.
The populist right. The alternative for Germany was a few months ago predicted to do quite well at the national elections. Now it seems to have declined somewhat, partially due to infighting. And historically, of course, because of Germany's past, there's been a real barrier to the rise of far-right populism in Germany. So the fact that we're even seeing seeds of it is really a reflection of how deeply the structural shifts in European political life go. The Netherlands, the populist there was predicted to come out on top. Even though Wilders did not win, he did manage to increase his vote. So I wouldn't take the election result as a sign of absolute defeat, but a sign that we have to continue to worry about the underlying trends that fed these parties. It's much more dangerous in a way in places like Poland and Hungary because the institutions and the norms of democracy are much weaker and therefore much easier to maneuver around or even overthrow. If we think about populism as a consequence of rising dissatisfaction and the inability of traditional elites and institutions to deal with it, then there could potentially be a silver lining in populism. Populists tend to raise issues that a lot of people are concerned about. They tend to focus on problems that are not being addressed. If traditional elites and institutions can look and say, hey, we better figure out better ways of dealing with these issues and concerns, then populists will have performed, oddly enough, a kind of backhanded service. If not, then we can expect, again, the populists to continue to grow in support and probably the problems not to be absolutely addressed. Politics is about getting your message across. So populists tend to be very good at this because they tend to present pretty simple and often problematic solutions to contemporary problems.
Populism is the political belief that the underdog, hardworking majority is undermined and exploited by a small elite minority. Populist politicians claim to represent the interests of average or working-class citizens and work to unite the population against a common enemy. For right-leaning politicians like Trump, that's immigrants and the Republican establishment. Throughout history, populist ideas have often coincided with charismatic demagogues, as these personality types are often successful at galvanizing the masses. In fact, one of the earliest populists was Julius Caesar, who undermined Rome's ruling aristocrats by appealing to the underrepresented working class. Today, populist rhetoric is pervasive throughout the world. In Europe, it's generally more popular on the ideological right, which believes that socialist or left-leaning policies negate the collective will of the people. This was the idea behind the 2016 Brexit referendum, as many working-class Brits felt that globalization provided by EU membership was not to their benefit. Similar populist sentiments have gained momentum throughout Europe in recent years, leading some experts to predict a string of other similar referendums and perhaps the gradual disintegration of the EU. In the US, however, populism is widespread. Conservatives like Trump, on the other hand, have used populist sentiments to tap into voters' frustrations with bureaucrats and general distrust of the federal government. For instance, the Tea Party movement formed in the wake of the 2008 global financial crisis was a protest against government overreach. So whether it be in the US or abroad, populist politicians tend to operate the same way. That is, they choose a popular enemy like the establishment, immigration, or criminals and rally voters to get behind that cause. Oftentimes, this has led to popular movements and legal reforms. Populism is an extremely effective political tool.